Welcome to Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. Our team's goal is to present science-based information about gardening and all things nature in New York's Hudson Valley. Our hosts are Master Gardener volunteers for the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene counties, midpoint along the Hudson River Valley. So if you're interested in gardening or nature or just nuggets of information about what's happening outside your door, listen in and enjoy the conversation. Whatever the season, we'll always have something to talk about.
This episode is the conclusion of this interview about the life of honeybees. Okay, so now we talked about the workers and the queen. This is all the girlies. What about those drones?
So the third last cast to talk about is drones. That's the male bees. There's generally only a few hundred in the hive, maybe 1,000 if it's a large colony. And their primary role is to mate with a fertile queen. And when he mates, he dies. Basically, his appendage falls off, just like a stinger. So that's actually why males don't have stingers. So their rear is truncated and fuzzy. They're also pretty big with huge eyes, which makes them easy to find. They don't do any nectar gathering, annual pollen gathering, no nest chores. They don't even feed or care for themselves. They rely on the worker bees. They only live one season because in the fall, and you can see this happening, they're literally kicked out of the hive.
I periodically read that the honeybee populations are on the decline. What's causing this? Colony collapse disorder? Mites? Or pesticides? What's going on?
Well, CCD is a phenomenon where the majority of all the worker bees simply disappear all at once. You'll have the queen, you'll have brood, you'll have drones, and you'll have good food stores. But what's missing are the worker bees. They're gone. They're not even dead on the bottom of the hive, on the floor. They're gone. It's kind of like a ghost ship in that regard.
The Marie Celeste of bees.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And unfortunately, those that are left there, they eat the food, and there's no one to bring more food back, so they're going to die. It was first reported in 2006 by a commercial beekeeper in Pennsylvania. And by 2009, there were reports of it in all but 12 states. The EPA certainly looked into it, and it unfortunately sort of disappeared before they could really figure out what was going on. But they've reported that cases of CCD, those symptoms I described where it just disappeared, have basically certainly declined, if not are gone entirely. The EPA surmises it was probably no single cause, but a combination of things like habitat loss. For instance, out in the Midwest, there's acres, if not miles, of monocrops. That leads to not only lack of forage, but poor nutrition. Could be poor genetics. With more and more beekeepers getting into beekeeping, we're breeding queens, and we're not being particularly careful about genetics to make it through winters. Overuse of pesticides and fungicides, they can be deadly to bees. And finally, viruses and diseases, especially those carried by varroa mites.
So those are the bee mites that we hear so much about?
Yeah, they're really devastating, and it's pretty much all the beekeepers are talking about anymore at the meetings as to how to handle or work around this. They came from Asia in the 1980s, and invasive species. Just imagine a mite. It's about the size of it compared on a bee compared to us is imagine the size of a dinner plate on your back. It's a pretty big creature that could be carrying around. And what's devastating about these mites, bees have had mites for forever. What these mites can do is they can actually penetrate the exoskeleton of the bee. So they get through that hard shell, and when they act like a tick or flea, when they bite, it injects viruses and diseases into the bloodstream of the animal or the bee. So that's how they act like ticks or fleas.
Whoa.
So it's not so much just like ticks or fleas. It's not so much the varroa mites or the ticks or fleas that kill you. It's the diseases they carry. And the varroa is a vector for 20-some diseases at least. One of them that you could see right away is something called deformed wing virus. It literally is, the wing is all shriveled up. It's not extended. It looks like it's been wet and dried out. It got wet and dried out and folded on itself. They just can't fly. And if they can't fly, they perish. If too many of them happen, they're not out foraging, the colony perishes. It is a major factor in deaths in winter for colonies. Unfortunately, even to this day, even though it's from the 1980s, there's no single known fix. Most people use a mixture of chemical and non-chemical approaches. There's integrated pest management where you would do cultural mechanical things. Like, for instance, instead of using a chemical, you would do a brood break, which would be you would take the queen out of the hive for a week or so there's no brood. And I guess that makes I have to go in to explain a little bit about the life cycle of the varroa. It has learned this little insidious way to cohabitate with the bees. It goes for the male or drone cells because they're bigger. Also, the males or drones take 3 or 4 days longer to develop and come out of the capped cell, which gives them cover for 3 or 4 more days because the honeybees can't see them under those wax cappings. Okay? So if you take the queen out and she can't lay eggs, the varroa are out and around. They could be seen more visually by the bees, and they could be picked on and eliminated through the bottom of the hive. But otherwise, they're just basically reproducing like rabbits under these caps of the cells. And their peak, I described the bell curve peak of the honeybee, that it's higher at the at the summer solstice, and they decline at the winter solstice. The varroa have an opposite phase. Their peak is when the bees are at the lowest, so there aren't as many bees around to take care of the varroa. So it's an off-shift phase. So that's how your colonies can die over winter. You think you've got it all under control, and you don't see them. I mean, you might see 1 or 2 varroa on the back of a bee, but if you see that, it's pretty much they're gone.
It's too late.
It's too late,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because where they really hang out is on the bellies of the bees. There's like scales under there that they literally sort of squeeze themselves into and under, and they're not seen that well. So the other bees can't pick them off. You know how monkeys groom themselves? The honeybees will groom themselves too.
Yeah.
And actually, there is a type of bee called varroa-sensitive bees that have a genetic trait that they're like right on top of these things grooming. And so that's a trait that you want to breed for. But anyway, you could do things like brood breaks and that sort of thing as a non-chemical way. But then there's half a dozen or so chemicals that you can use depending on temperature and weather and time of year. But the huge problem is it's really difficult to treat for an insect that's on another insect.
Okay, so with all these fun things going on, is this a combination of different things that can happen a threat to actual food production for people? I watched the film Yuli's Gold. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a Peter Fonda movie, and it is really good. It's about a beekeeper who provided hives to orchards and transported them around from place to place on a truck following the flowering seasons. Does this happen locally, too? I think the movie was in California.
Yeah, I didn't see that particular movie, but there actually was one that is out by a local beekeeper. It's really fascinating. His name's Peter Nelson. It's called The Pollinators, and it was actually playing at Rosendale a couple weeks ago. And it's the same idea. He is a 30-year beekeeper, just a couple hives in his backyard, but he's also a professional cinematographer. He's made quite a few documentaries. So he followed these commercial beekeepers around the country. And sure enough, they do come through the Hudson Valley. Let's see. They're trying to think of their range. They actually start in February out in the almond fields pollinating. So these big 18-wheeler trucks go out there with thousands of hives. And they set them out there. And then they work their way up. When that season's over, they work their way up to Washington State, where they do fruit orchards. And then they move across to the Great Plains, where they do canola, sunflowers, and alfalfa. Now, I'm not saying necessarily the same hive is going across, but they might hit every other one, that type of thing. But it is this big commercial migratory route that sort of circles around the country.
Now, wait a minute. These guys have an 8-week lifespan, and they travel more than I do cross-country.
Correct.
Okay, good to know.
Good, yeah, exactly. Well, they're like taken off of these 18-wheelers, put out in the orchards. They do their pollination, then they're all gathered up, put on the 18-wheelers, and driven to the next crop to be pollinated. So they're moving through the country from the west coast up to the northeast, I mean, up to the Great Plains, to the Midwest, and then they come through the Northeast. They come through for blueberries and apples and peaches. Columbia County especially is full of orchards.
Yeah.
So some of them will come through there. And then they go down the coast all the way down to Florida, where they get a few months rest, generally from November to January. And then if they're healthy enough, they'll start the circuit all over again the following year.
That's like industrialized beekeeping.
It is, and that's where, I mean, it is. Backyard beekeepers are minuscule numbers of hives compared to the number that are traveling around the country. And that's where the biggest hits are being taken and where the biggest losses are occurring.
So to keep the honeybee population up, we can still help as gardeners. And we're not near the percentage that these commercial operations are, but what are things that we could do? What should we plant to encourage them?
Gardeners, and actually anyone else for that matter, can help by offering a continual source of food, meaning flowers, throughout the season. But here, especially around here, especially in late summer, we traditionally have what's called a dearth. And it's generally in August, and it's when it gets hot and dry, and there's little rain, so the nectar source dries up. And the beekeeper locally has to intervene and feed them a syrup solution. Otherwise, they're going to be devouring their stores that they're saving for honey. So consider a garden that has late season flowers, especially like asters and goldenrod. I know that sounds crazy to plant out goldenrod, but they really need that late season punch to help them get through. When you do plant, you want to plant again in bulb masses and clumps instead of randomly dispersed things here and there. Again, the honeybees are very flower constant, and the least amount of distance they have to go, the more energy efficient they are. And try to use locally native plants when available. And one interesting benefit that you'll find if you put your flower beds close to your vegetable gardens, you will have a significant increase in yield.
You are listening to Digging In with Master Gardeners, a program from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties. You can learn more about the Cooperative Extension by visiting the website at ccecolumbiagreene.org. The topic for this segment is honeybees, and we're joined by Linda Aydlett, another Master Gardener volunteer. Let's dig right back in.
Okay, now we're talking about our gardens and how we can help the honeybees, which of course helps the honey production, which is kind of what I'm aiming for. I don't know about you. What are some specific plants that the bees like for their nectar? Do they have a preference for trees or shrubs or perennials or annuals?
Yeah, annuals and perennials, definitely. And we found that herbs and mints are also perfect for the honeybees. And I know people don't like them. I know I used to hate them. Dandelions, clover. Clover is good, and it's mainly because of the masses of flowers. Now, dandelions are really important because they're pretty much the first flower that blooms in mass early spring. So that's a really good shot in the arm. Clover is just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And again, very little distance to go from flower head to flower head. The other things I found locally is ground thyme. It grows pervasively here in Greene County. That's a great source. But again, these are low, small plants, so they grow in the grass usually. So maybe you want to not mow so close when you set your blades lower so that you're not taking the blooms off. And then when they quit blooming, go ahead and cut the grass.
So let's shift gears here. I understand you are a master beekeeper. How do you, quote, keep bees? What training's required?
Like raising any other livestock, to successfully maintain honeybees, you've got to have the proper setup, time, effort, and attention to the health and condition. So before you dive in, there's a few things you should take into consideration. First, you want to be sure it's legal. So, you just want to you call your local code officer, especially if it's going to have a lot of hives, if you're going to get into it commercially. But mainly what is most important is you want to be a good neighbor. You might want to check, and this is a little, not dicey, maybe opening up a can of worms, but it's really the neighborly thing to do. Be sure nobody is allergic to bees. You certainly don't want to have your neighbor end up in the hospital. You want to have a proper space, and by that I say you need to have room around to get around the hive. For instance, if for some reason they come out after you, you want to be able to back up, so you don't want a wall or a shrub or something to trip over. That wouldn't be good. You really want to have a good handle on their basic care. So, if you don't have bees yet, read books, look at YouTube videos. Although I will say there's an asterisk to watching YouTube videos. There's a lot of not good videos out there. Pick ones from universities and bee clubs. You got to decide if you're going to go solo or do you need help. There is physicality to it. The things get heavy. So you may want to have a spouse or a friend help you out with that part of it. Or even just confidence level. You may want to find a mentor. It's not an easy mental task to open up the lid to tens of thousands of stinging insects. It takes a little bit of getting over. But once you do, you realize, hey, they're really not that bad if you know what you're doing and you go in with a purpose and you're not slamming things around. And mainly if you're not squishing them to get too agitated. The guard bees will come out and they will literally hang out in front of your face. You cannot see it. You're trying to duck around and that bee will follow you the whole time. Take her cue. If she's ear guarding, walk away. Walk away for 30 feet. She will turn around and go back and then approach it a little bit differently, a little bit quieter. You need to be sure that you're going to be available during the busy season, and that would be actually early spring when the hive is growing, because if it's growing too fast, and the queen is laying crazy eggs, again, she can lay up to 2,000 eggs. If she's filling up all those little slots or cells, they're going to swarm because they have no room for her to lay. So you need to be in there checking, and that's actually a good thing, because you could take those full frames of eggs and create a second hive. You got free bees. So instead of letting them swarm, get some free bees. And then know where to order bees and equipment. So there's no specific training, but I certainly recommend a class or two to get a handle on it.
So then how does one actually get started? Where do you get the bees to start a hive or a colony? And how many hives does a typical beekeeper have?
Well, typically most backyard beekeepers have 1, 2, maybe up to a dozen or so. It depends on the beekeeper, how much time they have. It can fluctuate a lot. And keep in mind, it is agriculture subject to the weather. For instance, I started back in 2010 with 2, and it definitely has gone up and down again. And again, I've lost entire hives. I believe 2 years ago, I lost 15 hives. It was really kind of devastating. But I had invested in the woodenware, and I had lots of honey. All I needed were bees. So again, you could go to those 2 shops I mentioned, the Hudson Valley Bee or Better Bee. You do need to order your bees in winter. It's actually a pre-order, because both of these companies or shops will actually literally run down to Florida to get the bees, because they're breeding them over winter where it's milder, and they will bring them back up for sale in April and May for installation. So you need to pre-order so they know how many to pick up. They're purchased actually a couple different ways. The ones that are brought back up from Georgia are in what's called a package, and it's basically the size of a shoebox. It's a wooden box with screens on 2 sides for ventilation. And it literally is about 3 pounds of bees and a queen and a can of syrup. And the syrup is just to get them up from down south to up here. I liken it to being an unfurnished apartment with no food in the pantry. So they're starting from scratch. They're starting like that swarm that took off into the tree. You need to get them early in the season so they develop well. The second way you get them is called a nuke, which is kind of an odd term to me. It's shortened for nucleus, meaning a small colony. That's all it means, is a small colony. And it's usually 4 to 5 frames of bees, comb, stores, brood, the queen. It's basically a mini hive. It's all set, ready to go. What do they call it? Like off the shelf? Key ready? Yeah, whatever. It's just ready to go. It's just small. They're certainly much further along in development, and they will take off for you, especially if you give them more room to expand into. Cost for the packages are about $145 each. They keep going up every year. It's amazing. And the nukes are a bit more expensive. They could be up to $250 depending on sourcing quality. And part of the thing with the nukes too is, if you find a good supplier, local suppliers, and there's 1 or 2 that are really excellent, they have exceptional genetics. And when you take a split off of those hives, they keep producing and keep producing and producing. And that's how I was able to grow this many hives. So if you added up woodenware, equipment, and bees, you could spend easy $450 to $500 per hive. Yeah, it's a bit expensive. But again, I have to admit, I've hardly had to replace any woodenware. It really doesn't rot because it's not sitting in the wet ground. So you could use it over and over. So again, if you need to replace bees, that would be your ongoing costs. And I guess if you're lucky and are able to do splits and grow your apiary, then you would have to spend money for new woodenware.
Okay, so this is with all things going like they should. But now I live in Greene County, so there's a couple of obstacles beekeepers are pretty famously having to deal with. The one winter damage we've kind of discussed, but bears.
Yeah, bears. I have lived in the town of Catskill, bordering on the edge of Athens, since I've been here about, 12 years now. And while there was a bear a mile down the road, I never had to deal with it until a month or so ago when my neighbor sent us a picture of a bear on her bird feeder and the teeth marks left by the bear on her bird feeder. So now I got to look into that. Yeah, bear are a huge problem in winter when they come out. They are devastating. They're not, contrary to Winnie the Pooh, they're not really looking for honey. They're looking for a source of protein. And baby larvae are an excellent source of protein. And to get to the baby larva, they have to rip that hive apart. And it is, literally, it's like a tornado went through. If you see the damage that the bear does. So I'm looking into, I have the parts, I need to put it all together. Basically, beekeepers in bear country, which is Greene County and parts of Columbia, you got to invest in electric fence. That's the only thing that's going to work. And you need to get it up before, if you can, before the bear finds the hives, because they're more persistent. Otherwise, it's quite pricey just for the fencing and whatnot. It's several $100s. But then if you're going for a solar charger, which is what I need, and most do because bee yards are usually remote from a source of electricity, you can spend well over $500 for just the charger. But if you think of that, it is an investment. And if you've got something like, say, 30 hives, and for me to have to replace, again, because the bears destroy the woodenware, you're starting over from scratch. You got
You're going to cost you a whole lot more.
thousands of dollars that you need to protect in replacement loss.
And the other biggie is climate change.
Yeah, that's something that beekeepers just now starting to talk about a little bit. The concern is that, for millennia, bees have been coming out of winter hibernation, and they're not really hibernating, but winter season, just as the flowers start to bloom. That's the ideal situation. They're hunkered down, the weather's starting to change, the flowers are starting to bloom, and the bees come out, and there's a food source readily available. They're ready to rock and roll and take off. But if that gets out of phase, if we have warm or too cold springs, they're out of phase. And either the beekeeper has to step in, or basically there's nothing there for the bees to eat. So you got to watch your weather, and it's a long-term concern. And it's actually a long-term concern also as to whether certain things, like, for instance, one of the other earlier plants that bees depend on is a maple tree. Like a willow, it provides a rich source of protein in early spring. And with climate change, my understanding is, in doing a research for one of our Columbia County Fair projects on climate change, was that it is predicted in the year 2030 there would be hardly any maple trees around.
Oh, that's the temperature.
Exactly.
Not even the out of sync. And that
exactly. The temperature's warming up. The maple trees would be moving basically up the northern colder climates.
And they don't have the pollination. I don't know if the maples rely on it as much, but if the pollination synchronicity isn't there, then the plants are going to be messed up as well.
Correct. But the point being is that maple is, my friends who do maple syruping, I stay in touch with them because about the time they're stopping maple syrup is when the blossoms are starting to come out for the pollination. So I really rely on that, because once that pollen starts coming in, that's a signal to the queen to really start laying eggs, to really start ramping up that there's food available.
So if someone's interested in starting a hive, what are the typical duties of a beekeeper?
Well, as a beginning beekeeper, I guess you should be prepared to open and inspect your hives in the beginning, like in early spring, every week to 10 days. And you're doing that because, again, you want to monitor that growth, that if they're expanding too fast, you want to be able to step in and split the hive before it swarms and lands in your neighbor's garage, and then you have an issue. And then you need to also be monitoring to be sure they have enough food supplies. There's actually a few questions that you could ask yourself each time you go in to inspect. And again, the first thing is, do they have enough room? If they don't have enough room, they'll swarm. Is the queen laying eggs? And it's really kind of cool when you pull the comb up and you try to search for the eggs. You're looking for those little grains of rice, and it just is really heartening to see that, oh my gosh, she's filled every cell. I could put my hand out and every one of those cells is going to be a baby bee. So that's a good sign. Is the colony, if you have multiple hives, it's actually recommended for beginning beekeepers to get get 2 hives, because you could compare one to the other. If one's not doing so well, you say, oh, I may have problems. I mean, to look into this further. You could correct the problem. And if one is doing well, you could take some of its resources, meaning a frame or 2 of its brood or babies, not the queen, and move it into the one that's not doing so well. You want to watch for, are there any queen cells present? If you can't find the queen, you look for the eggs. If you can't find the eggs, you're looking for queen cells, because that means that the queen has died and they're preparing to swarm, or she's been superseded. Maybe she's not an old queen, she's not laying well, or you accidentally crushed her. For some reason, there's no queen, and you need to watch for these queen cells. You want to look for signs of disease, abnormality. You can have issues with, if a hive is dwindling in population, you get problems with wax moths and hive beetles. If they get in there, they literally slime any honey that's there. It's not sellable. It's not even usable by the bees. And then the most important thing is, do you have enough stores that'll hold you till your next inspection? And then in fall, you want to be sure they got enough to get through winter.
Well, Linda, thank you for joining us. This has been so interesting. In a future episode, we hope to discuss other types of bees, some of which are less friendly to human, more of the native ones. And I suspect we're going to be asking you to come back, because I have 4,000 new questions.
Okay, it's my pleasure. It's been really great talking to you both. Thanks for having me.
That concludes another episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. We would like to thank Xandra Powers and Devin Connolly from the Cornell Cooperative Extension of Columbia and Greene Counties for production support. And a special thanks to our listeners for joining us on this episode of Nature Calls, Conversations from the Hudson Valley. You can find links to any of the topics mentioned in this episode at our website at ccecolumbiagreene.org. Comments and suggestions for future topics may be directed to us at columbiagreenmgv@cornell.edu or on the CCE Master Gardener Volunteers of Columbia and Greene Facebook page. For more information about CCE of Columbia and Greene, visit our website or visit in person during business hours at our campuses in Hudson or Acre.
Cornell Cooperative Extension provides equal program and employment opportunities in accordance with applicable laws.